My brother stole my inheritance while I was paying for his tuition, so I bought the family business before he could claim anything. I'm a 28-year-old guy. And for as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one in my family. While my younger brother Alex seemed to float through life, I was the one juggling multiple jobs just to keep things together. I'd wake up before dawn, grind through 12-hour shifts, come home exhausted, and still find myself calculating bills, groceries, and tuition payments for Alex. It wasn't glamorous. And most days it felt invisible, but I didn't care. I thought that being dependable was enough, that sacrifice was part of love, part of family loyalty. Meanwhile, Alex breezed through college with charm and luck on his side, and my parents couldn't stop gushing about how special and destined for greatness he was. As if my endless work and steady hand were nothing but background noise, I remember the day my grandfather passed away. Leaving behind a trust meant to support the family. The lawyer's words hit me in a strange way. It's substantial, and it's all in your name if you choose to claim it. Part of me felt relief. Part of me felt uneasy. I never imagined I would actually lay claim to it. I'd been the one paying Alex's tuition, buying his textbooks, covering his rent, smoothing over every financial hiccup without a single complaint. I told myself it was fine. It was family duty, and family duty came first. He was my brother, and he was my parents' pride. I rationalized the sacrifices, thinking loyalty would eventually be reciprocated. That the world, even my own family, would eventually notice what I had done some nights. I'd sit in the dim glow of my kitchen light, counting receipts and paying bills I didn't want to pay, and I'd glance at Alex sprawled on the couch, video games blaring, headphones on, completely oblivious. "Thanks for covering rent this month," he'd call out casually, not looking up. That was it. No hint of gratitude, no awareness of the weight I carried. I'd just nod, smile weakly, and mutter, "No problem," because that's what responsible people do. But deep down, a knot was forming in my stomach, tiny, comfortable knot that whispered maybe loyalty alone wouldn't be enough. And yet, I kept going, convinced that one day it would all make sense. Until the first real crack appeared. Paying for Alex's tuition wasn't new to me, but this semester hit differently. I found myself staring at a stack of bills, each one higher than I expected, and realized my paycheck barely covered my own rent after shoving half of it toward his textbooks and fees. Alex sauntered into the kitchen, hoodie slung over one shoulder, and grinned. "Hey, you think I could borrow some extra for that new laptop? The program's glitching again." His tone was casual, light, like asking for a cup of sugar, but my chest tightened. I'll see what I can do," I said, shoving my frustration down, calculating the money I didn't have. He didn't even glance at me. Just another day, another ask, another sacrifice. The worst part wasn't Alex, it was everyone else. My parents had this uncanny ability to make me feel invisible while hyping up his every little success. "Alex has such ambition," my mom would gush. "I wish you had his drive," my dad would add, casually dismissing the hundreds of late nights I'd spent working overtime so Alex could stay in school. I hated feeling like I had to compete with someone who had never lifted a finger. Every compliment, every acknowledgement that should have been mine went to him, and the gnawing thought in the back of my head grew louder. Why was my loyalty always taken for granted? Even with that growing unease, I told myself it was fine. I reminded myself that family came first, that sacrifices were part of the deal. I rationalized my exhaustion, my missed nights out, my hollow weekends, as investment in Alex. In my parents' happiness, in keeping peace. But some nights, when the apartment was silent and the hum of the heater filled the room, I'd find myself staring at the papers about my grandfather's trust, wondering how it could all be for me, yet feel an odd sense of dread. Deep down, something told me this trust, this inheritance might not stay as innocent as it seemed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that what I was building for my family was quietly unraveling. Right under my nose, by the time Alex reached his final year of college, I was running on fumes. Every paycheck felt like it was just a step toward keeping him afloat, while my own dreams gathered dust in the corner. I'd given up vacations, hobbies, even weekends with friends, all so Alex could chase his grades. And yet every success of his was paraded in front of me like a trophy I had no part in earning. "Look at me, I'm doing something with my life," he would say, half joking, half gloating, while I sat silently, counting receipts and hiding the exhaustion behind a neutral nod. My parents beamed at him like he was the sun rising over a bleak, responsible landscape that I inhabited. "You're too serious sometimes," they'd tell me. "Alex just has charisma." Charisma. That word burned in my chest more than any insult could. I remember one night, snow falling outside our small apartment window. When Alex casually mentioned he might need a loan for a summer internship abroad, "Just a few thousand," he said, leaning back in his chair like it was nothing. My stomach sank as I realized it was another chunk of money I didn't have. I nodded and muttered, "We'll figure something out," but inside I was screaming. How much more could I give? How many more sacrifices could I make before the people I loved actually saw me? My grandfather's trust stared at me from the paperwork on the table, a silent reminder that there was security meant for me. Yet I hadn't touched a cent of it. It was during one of these long nights, surrounded by the hum of the heater and the cold bite of winter through the windows, that a small, uneasy thought lodged itself in my mind. What if all my sacrifices weren't being honored? What if Alex had no intention of ever reciprocating, and my parents? Maybe they didn't care? I shook my head, trying to dismiss it, telling myself it was paranoia. But a tiny knot of suspicion had formed, and I couldn't shake the creeping feeling that I might be building something for someone who would use it against me. And somewhere in that snow-lit silence, I started to wonder if loyalty alone was enough to protect me. It started with little things, small inconsistencies I noticed. When paying Alex's tuition or checking, the joint bank account we'd been using for his expenses. A few missing receipts here, unexplained charges there, nothing huge at first, but enough to make my stomach churn. One evening I asked him directly, leaning over the kitchen counter while the fluorescent light flickered above. "Hey, Alex, did you use the extra funds I transferred for textbooks on anything else?" He froze, eyes darting away for a split second, and then shrugged. Maybe some supplies for the project?" His voice was casual, too casual, like I was overreacting. But I could feel a slight tremor in his confidence, a hint that he knew something I didn't. I wanted to trust him. I really did. But a pit in my chest was growing, and it wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was dread. My parents, of course, remained blissfully unaware, praising Alex for his initiative and responsibility, while I sat there quietly, knowing the truth was slipping through the cracks. Even simple family dinners became tense. Alex would smirk at me over mashed potatoes as if testing boundaries, and I could feel every eye subtly shifting between us. I tried to tell myself it was normal sibling rivalry, that maybe I was imagining things. But deep down, the knot of unease kept tightening. It wasn't just the money or the receipts, it was the feeling that everything I had done, all the sacrifices, were being quietly undermined. Each time Alex smiled too wide, laughed too loud, or mentioned a future plan, I felt a chill run down my spine. I couldn't explain it, but something was coming, and it wouldn't be small. My grandfather's trust, the inheritance, the family's security, it all felt suddenly fragile, like it was balancing on a knife's edge. And as I washed the dishes that night, listening to the water drip into the sink, I realized whatever was coming, I wouldn't see it until it was too late. I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. One afternoon, I logged into the online account for my grandfather's trust to check a statement, and my heart nearly stopped. The balance was gone. Not just lower, but completely rerouted. A lump formed in my throat as I realized what had happened. Alex had somehow manipulated the paperwork, diverted the funds, and made it look like the trust was his. Years of tuition, rent, and living expenses I'd covered for him had been paving the way for him to steal what was legally mine. My hands shook as I refreshed the page, hoping it was a glitch, a mistake. Anything but the numbers didn't lie. I remember pacing my tiny apartment, snow lightly falling against the windows, trying to breathe. "Alex, what the hell did you do?" I muttered under my breath, as if saying it out loud could undo it. But of course, he hadn't done it out loud. He hadn't admitted it to anyone. My parents? Oblivious. And even worse, if anyone found out, Alex would charm his way out, just like always. That knot of dread I'd felt for months suddenly exploded into panic and rage. I thought about every sacrifice I had made, the sleepless nights, the skipped meals, the extra shifts, the weekends spent counting receipts while Alex played video games and socialized. And now, he was standing on top of it all, smiling as if he'd earned it. I felt a cold fury settle over me. Years of loyalty, and this was the thanks I got. But beneath the anger, a spark ignited. Maybe this wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. If he thought he could take what I'd earned, manipulate the system, and charm everyone into his corner, he hadn't counted on me figuring it out. I knew then that whatever I had to do, I had to do it carefully. No mistakes, no emotional outbursts, no letting anyone see me crack. And as I stared at the account statement for the 100th time, a plan began forming in my mind, one that Alex would never see coming. I hit a point where I didn't know how to function anymore. After discovering Alex had redirected the inheritance, I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Every late night, every missed dinner, every sacrifice I'd made, all of it felt meaningless. My apartment, once my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, staring at bills I could barely cover while thinking about the money that had been stolen from me. The trust I'd placed in my brother and the parents who'd turned a blind eye. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop replaying every conversation, every smile, every thanks Alex had ever given me. When I confronted my parents, I realized just how deep the betrayal ran. Alex is smart. He knows what he's doing, my dad said, brushing me off like I was overreacting. You're just too rigid. You need to relax, my mom added, her tone almost patronizing. I felt my chest tighten like a vice squeezing every ounce of hope out of me. The people who were supposed to protect me, the ones I'd trusted my whole life, didn't see it. They didn't see me. And Alex, of course, acted like nothing had happened. Like he was untouchable. Like I was the crazy one. I remember walking alone through the streets late at night. Snow crunching under my boots, lights reflecting off the wet pavement, and thinking maybe I'd been wrong about loyalty. Maybe doing the right thing wasn't enough. Maybe hard work and responsibility only made it easier for people like Alex to take advantage. I felt small, powerless, and completely alone. And yet somewhere beneath the anger, the exhaustion, and the despair, a flicker of resolve began to burn. I wasn't done yet. I couldn't be done. But for the first time in my life, I felt completely untethered, standing at the edge of something I didn't fully understand, and that's when I realized, if I wanted justice, I'd have to fight smarter than I ever had before. I spent the next few weeks buried in research, quietly piecing together a plan. Every spare hour at work was spent scrolling through contracts, shareholder agreements, and old family business documents. I needed leverage, a way to take control before Alex realized I even knew what he'd done. I couldn't let him get another inch, couldn't allow him to profit off my sacrifices. Each detail I uncovered added fuel to the fire. I started noticing loopholes, clauses, and technicalities that could swing control legally if I moved fast. Alex, of course, remained oblivious. He spent afternoons bragging to friends about future plans for the family business, ideas funded by the tuition I'd paid for him. His arrogance was staggering, and it made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. Every conversation, every casual smirk, only confirmed one thing: he thought he had already won. I realized then that if I acted emotionally, I would lose. I had to be precise, measured, smarter than him. I started liquidating personal investments quietly, setting aside money without alerting anyone. Nights were long and lonely, the hum of the heater in my apartment, my only companion as I sketched out each step. I imagined confrontations in my head, rehearsed dialogue, and calculated how much evidence I would need to prove Alex's manipulation if it ever came to it. I couldn't trust anyone in my family, yet tiny leak could alert him, and even as exhaustion weighed on me, a strange thrill coursed through my veins. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of purpose. A plan forming that wasn't about sacrifice or loyalty, was about justice. I could feel the shift, the tiniest sense of control returning, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. One wrong move, one emotional slip, and Alex would crush me before I could even blink. And as I closed the laptop that night, staring at the ceiling of my quiet apartment, I promised myself I would not fail. I moved quietly like a shadow in my own family. Every call, every meeting with shareholders, every document I signed was calculated to stay under Alex's radar. I couldn't afford a single slip. Couldn't let him sense that I was reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Days blurred into nights as I negotiated double-checked figures and made discreet arrangements that would give me majority control of the family business. The adrenaline was constant, a mixture of fear and excitement, and it kept me awake long after the office lights went out. Alex remained clueless, strutting around the house, talking about plans as if the business was already his. "Once I take over, we'll expand into 2 more cities," he bragged one evening. Tapping away at his laptop, completely unaware, I was quietly securing the shares that would make those plans irrelevant. I forced myself to nod, smile, and say, "Sounds ambitious," while my stomach twisted. Every laugh, every smug glance, fueled a quiet rage. He was walking into a trap he didn't even see. I remember the smell of coffee on my desk, the faint hum of the heater, the rustling of papers as I cross-referenced legal clauses. Each step I took felt like chess, precise and deliberate. I could feel the weight of months of sacrifice lifting slightly. Finally, I wasn't just reactive, I was proactive. The fear that had consumed me since discovering the trust's redirection was turning into focus. But the tightrope I was walking was thin. If Alex found out before the acquisition was finalized, he could block everything. If my parents asked too many questions, I could be exposed. Every knock on the door, every phone call made my pulse spike. And as I finalized the last of the paperwork late one night, snow drifting softly against the window, I allowed myself a quiet thought. Very soon, he wouldn't have a clue what hit him. The family meeting was tense from the first second. I walked in with the documents tucked under my arm, feeling the weight of months of careful planning pressing against my chest. Alex looked up, smiling like he owned the room, probably imagining his victory lap already. My parents flitted between us, unsuspecting, chatting about mundane things, oblivious to the storm about to hit. "I called this meeting to go over the business," I said, my voice steady, forcing confidence into every word. Alex's grin faltered just a fraction, but I didn't let myself acknowledge it. I laid the documents on the table, sliding each one forward. "I've secured majority control," I said quietly, letting the words hang. His eyes widened, the smirk disappearing entirely. "Wait, what? What do you mean?" His voice cracked slightly, trying to mask panic with indignation. My parents stared, mouths slightly open, as I calmly explained the steps I'd taken, the shares I'd purchased, and the legal agreements that gave me authority. Every word was deliberate, every pause measured. Alex tried to argue, leaning back, raising his voice, pulling his charm out like a weapon. "This isn't fair. You can't just—" I cut him off. "Fair doesn't mean you get to steal what's mine," I said, my voice low, cold, but firm. The room was silent, except for the hum of the heater and the faint creak of the floorboards under our feet. For the first time, Alex was off balance. I could see the realization in his eyes, the panic creeping in as he understood the tables had turned. My parents finally seemed to register what had happened, their expressions a mix of shock and guilt. The air was thick with tension, heavy and suffocating, and I felt a strange mixture of vindication and exhaustion. And even as Alex tried to argue more, fumbling for excuses, I knew I had him exactly where I wanted, powerless, exposed, and completely unaware of the next steps I was planning. Once the initial shock wore off, I started laying out every receipt, every tuition payment I'd made for Alex, every late-night shift I'd worked just to keep him afloat. I could see his smug facade cracking as I traced each dollar, each sacrifice. Each moment he'd manipulated me without a second thought. "Do you remember this semester?" I asked, sliding a spreadsheet across the table. All of Alex's tuition, books, rent, all of it came from me. And all of it was meant to help him, not to fund a future he wasn't entitled to. Alex's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. His eyes darted between me and the documents as if hoping they'd vanish, but I had everything meticulously organized. I didn't, he started, stammering, trying to charm or deflect, but the room was no longer his audience. My parents, who had long praised him for his initiative and charisma, could no longer ignore the truth staring them in the face. I watched as disbelief slowly replaced their blind pride, and guilt began to seep into their expressions. I brought out the final piece, the legal documents showing how he had redirected the trust. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Alex's eyes widened, his confidence evaporating into panic. He had assumed charm and luck would carry him through, that no one would ever question his entitlement. But now the reality was undeniable. The man who had taken so much from me was finally exposed, his schemes laid bare, and I could feel a cold sense of satisfaction settling in my chest. I sat back, letting the truth sink in. For years I'd carried the weight of responsibility, loyalty, and sacrifice. For years Alex had taken it all for granted. Now, justice was unfolding, and the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. And as I watched him struggle to respond, fumbling for excuses that no one would believe, I realized this was just the beginning. He had no idea what was coming next. The moment I assumed full control of the family business, I felt a strange mix of relief, triumph, and exhaustion. Months of planning, sleepless nights, and careful maneuvering had finally culminated in this one undeniable fact. I was in charge. Alex, who had spent years acting untouchable, now sat across from me, shoulders slumped, face pale, as the reality of his own manipulation crashed down on him. My parents looked on, quiet this time, no lectures. No excuses, just a heavy acknowledgement of the truth they had ignored for too long. I've handled the shares, the contracts, and all the accounts, I said, my voice calm but firm. Everything is under my name now. You no longer have access to anything you didn't earn. Alex opened his mouth to argue, to charm, to manipulate. But the evidence and legal protections I had put in place rendered him powerless. Every smug grin, every sly comment from the past evaporated into panic. The family that had once overlooked my sacrifices now finally had to recognize them. For the first time in years, I felt light, like a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying was finally gone. I had stood up, not just for the inheritance or the business, but for every late night, every unpaid shift, every time I had put others before myself. Justice wasn't about cruelty or revenge. It was about fairness. And for once, it was mine. Alex left the room defeated, muttering under his breath, but I didn't need him to admit defeat. I didn't need validation from my parents. The victory was mine to hold, a silent, unwavering acknowledgement that loyalty, hard work, and patience had triumphed over entitlement and deceit. And as I looked around the office, the hum of the lights above and the faint scent of coffee in the air, I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. I had reclaimed what was mine, protected my legacy, and finally, for the first time, felt the peace that comes from taking control of my own life. But even in that triumph, I knew one thing. Staying vigilant would always be part of protecting what I had earned. After everything settled, finally had a moment to breathe. The office, once a battlefield of hidden agendas and manipulated numbers, felt calm for the first time in years. I walked through the space, touching the edge of my desk, the leather-bound ledgers, and I realized how much of myself I had poured into not just the business, but into keeping my family together. I had been the responsible one, the silent backbone, the one who sacrificed endlessly, and now, finally, I could do it on my own terms. Alex was still around, but powerless. My parents were adjusting, slowly learning to acknowledge my efforts instead of idolizing his charm. The dynamics hadn't completely healed, but for the first time I felt I wasn't just reacting, I was in control. I made a quiet vow. I would protect this business, my legacy, and myself without bending to manipulation again. Every contract, every investment, every decision would be mine to make, and I would no longer let others dictate my worth. There were evenings when I sat by the window, city lights reflecting off the glass, and I thought about all the pain, betrayal, and exhaustion that had led me here. It had been worth it, not for revenge, not for proving Alex wrong, but for reclaiming my life and my dignity. I had learned that loyalty is valuable, but self-respect is priceless. I could finally invest in myself, in my dreams, in the kind of family I wanted around me. And though the memories of betrayal lingered, they no longer held me hostage. I had transformed the anger, the sleepless nights, and the heartbreak into fuel for empowerment. I realized I could trust myself, rely on my judgment, and build the future I wanted without fear. As I closed the office door one last time that night, the hum of the lights fading into silence, I smiled quietly. I wasn't just a survivor of deceit. I was a master of my own destiny. And for the first time, I felt fully, unapologetically free.